Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the webinar where we take you on how to make even more impact with waste. My name is Gilbert Rod. I'm a circular economy specialist at Renewi and I'll be your host for the next 90 minutes. In this webinar, let's start with a couple of household announcements. The first household announcement is that the webinar will be spoken in Dutch. Most of it is spoken in Dutch. Only Charbel Moussa from KPMG will be presenting in English. So everything that speaks Dutch. But we also have an AI stream that translates Dutch into English, so that English speakers can also follow it properly. And suppose it. Let's say you have a question. Reassure him. At the end, there is plenty of time for the Q&A. So then come the experts from Van Renewi and KPMG. Those are available for the questions you have to answer. And finally, it is possible to watch the broadcast again. So suppose you're unable to watch the entire broadcast today because of time. Then you can quietly look back on it somewhere else. Or suppose you think so. Circular Plus is certainly very interesting for that or that colleague. Then you can also share the broadcast. Because next week you will receive an email with a link to YouTube to watch the broadcast again. So that's just in terms of household announcements. What's on the agenda in the next 90 minutes? Well, we'll start with Ankie van Wertjes, CEO of FutureUp, and she'll take you into that economy, that one. Is that true? That vision of the future. Then René Heimskamp takes you along in yes. Waste does not exist. That's it. It's been around for a long time. Renewi's motto and how you can make an impact with a good source of separation. Next, Alice Schimmelpenninck explains how Circular Plus works and how you can make additional impact your own value chain. Because that's what today is about. At Circular Plus, it's about that additional impact in your own value chain, the so-called insetting. And so we're not going to talk about it over or have a settlement. Throughout that piece, the MRV system that KPMG has developed for us is crucial. That is the foundation for making that impact audit-proof. So that's really important. And that continues. Charbel Moussa from KPMG will be explained in English. I hope that's easy for everyone to follow. And then Ankie van Wertjes talks to Alice Schimmelpenninck and René Heimskamp about a number of customer cases. We would have loved to have had a number of customers at the table here. Unfortunately, that did not work. But we do have whole, very nice customer cases. Finally, the Q&A where you can ask your questions during the entire webinar. There you don't have to wait until the end. We have an editorial team that collects the questions, goes to the end to me as host. And then, yes. Then those are the 90 minutes we have planned for this webinar. Yes, I hope. I expect it to be a very inspiring meeting and I wish you lots of fun watching. I would like to give the floor to Ankie van Wertjes. Welcome everyone. How fantastic that you are here and sitting here. Because that means you image and want to make an impact on this world. My name is Ankie from my GR's. Career has actually consisted of two parts, namely as director in a consulting firm, where my success was measured by cost savings, Ibiza improvements and market growth. My time as an impact entrepreneur, where I built 24 companies and my success was measured by saving water, CO2 savings and the income of small farmers, for example. And I am a firm believer that those two worlds come together. And that is also a story. What I want to come to you. I want to come and tell you here on behalf of FutureUp. We are a platform with 800 companies that want to let the economy and social profit go hand in hand. Let me start by outlining the current situation. And that's not necessarily a nice picture when it comes to sustainability. In the current geopolitical tensions, we notice that sustainability is on the back of your to-do list, or at least from your priority list, and oil and gas and resilience stand at the top. We see that, of course, in America, where there is pressure to weaken reports. And unfortunately, we've also seen that in Europe. Where fantastic Green Deal legislation was ready that has now been put on the brakes quite a bit, especially by traditional industry that finds it a bit difficult to take action. What do we see happening with the Green Deal legislation? That is a question that was asked to me. And right now, we're seeing a number of things. You have the CSR. That legislation that many of you have been working on, and currently we see it being implemented for a group of large companies. Namely companies that have more than 1,000 employees and a turnover of more than 450 million euros. A group below does not have to report. CSRD, the anti-look-away law, where you will mainly look at your Scope 3 internationally. It has also been further weakened, and we even see that in the Netherlands, only a very small number of companies still have to report on this. And then, even at this point, we see that the lobby is lobbying for legislation that is coming when it comes to deforestation, EU, and PWR, where the question is even whether PFAS cannot be removed from legislation. In other words, at the moment, sustainability seems to be over. Where we were in the peak of inflated expectations a few years ago. This is a model you often see used, developed by Oxford about major changes, and was in that peak or in expectations. Paul Polman, for instance, who said we're making Unilever net positive in numbers. But that DSM had completely transformed. And right now, you all know AI is in that peak. Because that's going to change the world. It looks like we're in a slump right now. It all turns out to be not so easy. The economy is either a little bit upsetting or geopolitical tensions are a little against it. So it all seems to be happening a little less. Yes. That's not a very good basis for starting my story. And yet, I see a glimmer of hope. Because that legislation has been weakened and 80% of the companies in our supporters and wider says we will just continue to research and report on sustainability. Our sustainability strategy is in place. In fact, much better anchored in our business than before. 60% of SMEs continue to report. And that says something. Because that's not just intrinsic motivation. We see. And that's what this model is really good for. That sustainability is currently becoming part of the business and therefore ultimately just enters the core of the company. And why am I using this model for that? I've been going with it for a while now. A while ago, we had the internet. There was a technology trigger. The internet offers opportunities. There was a peak or an expectation. Silicon Valley grew. We were going to change the world with the internet. And that's when the bubble burst in 2004. And what company can imagine doing business without the internet? Well, I think even the baker on the corner has a website and orders his raw materials via the internet. So I firmly believe that sustainability is going through the same curve and are currently taking steps to include sustainability at the core of the business. And what do we also see happening in the reporting side? That it's no longer a joke. And of course, we still need to report a number of companies. But that it's actually about a strategic advantage that companies see that insight into their chains and sustainability provides them. And I can say that because I hear that from my supporters, out of 1,400 companies. But fortunately, I can also prove it very nicely with research. And I want to start with an investigation by GIA, a sustainable reporting initiative, to investigate the quality of reporting. I understand that you are mildly critical, but the great thing is, they have compiled 30 independent studies and 70% of those studies indicate that companies report on sustainability with facts at the same professional level as financial reporting. Right now, having better access to capital. Because this is why banks and insurers require increased operational efficiency and a better customer proposition. And 30% of the studies see neutral as a slight advantage. Only 70% of studies have evidence of that. And I liked it. I have a practical example of a mid-sized company, a transport company. What when I introduced CSR, who came to me and started grumbling tremendously. They thought and, of course, they received reports from all their major customers. She grumbled enormously about that. I already have to feed. It already needs to be more efficient. I already have to report financially and then I also need to report my sustainability and CO2 data. We help them with a tool, the VSME standard. They started reporting and found out halfway through that 17% of their trucks were not full enough or even drove back empty. Of course, they didn't get that from their financial reports, but when they started to do their CO2 report, they were going to measure that. They have made improvements to this and are therefore now having an enormous positive impact on the bottom line. I use this example a lot. It's the CEO's permission, because then you see that someone who had a resistance to reporting is now one of the biggest proponents and says yes. I report on sustainability. My customers really like that. But it really brings me to the bottom line. Fact 2. The CO2 performance ladder for construction companies. Probably an acquaintance. We see that many large parties currently also require reports in major tender processes and also base their awards on that. So no longer just on price, but also just on. Do you have the right data for me to show that you are making CO2 improvements? Well, those companies that use that ladder have shown that they have up to 20% CO2 savings. But what I also found very funny is that these types of companies are therefore more innovative. And when it comes to construction, you immediately think of the very large parties. But I liked the fact that the Trade Association for Landscaping and Earthworkers, that is mostly SMEs, have looked at each other from yes. Will we try this too? Our municipalities are not asking about it yet. But we better be ahead and actually start measuring our CO2 data. Here is an example of such a green company. 50% of their industry participated. They thought yes, it doesn't work, then it doesn't hurt, I'm going to try it. And within 3 months after they created insight and thus collected the data, they had a good marketing advantage. They had a better proposition to their customers. Because they were also able to provide that data immediately. Should you ever be asked about it, they were already ahead of it. They had seen improvements in their processes and ultimately also cost savings on their energy supply through data reporting. Seen, data and sustainability data therefore has a business advantage. In fact, parties that do this that report on this, there was an investigation into that.
Waar dus blijkt dat van de 100 grote bedrijven in Nederland hebben ze het verschil gezien tussen bedrijven die een klimaatrapportage hebben of een CSRD.
So it turns out that out of 100 large companies in the Netherlands, they have seen the difference between companies that have a climate report or an ISO that report and those who saw that as a must instead of a strategic advantage. And that was 27 billion euros. Because those companies that started doing this early were already investing in chains and every euro they had invested in sustainable chains. Energy savings, better waste treatment, led to 46 euro savings within 5 years. Another example of reporting is not just a must, if you do it well. It therefore also provides a real financial benefit. And unfortunately, I have a company you may all be familiar with. That financial reporting has given priority over their art. Where did Monsanto buy? That's a pesticide company that uses Roundup. Impact numbers didn't look so good. Financial figures looked very good. So it was a company that could make good money in the short term. The opposite has happened because Monsanto has such a negative impact. Quite a few lawsuits have arisen and they have currently lost 80% of their market value, because they ignored the impact data and gave the financial data an advantage. So yes, you know, You can see it as positive.
Ja,
But you'd
je
also
kan het
better
als
understand the
positief
risks
zien,
of your
maar
impact.
je kan ook
Because this is what you
negatieve
want.
risico's van
Of
je
course,
impact in
you
kaart
don't want to
brengen.
have it in your own company. At
Wil
that
je natuurlijk
strategic
niet in je
level.
eigen bedrijf
And
hebben
I actually want to end
toepassen.
with a really nice
En
example
ik
from a
wil
long
eigenlijk
time
eindigen met
ago,
een heel
where
leuk
I was in front of
voorbeeld van heel
myself.
lang geleden waar ik zelf bij was. Een voorbeeld van een
An example of a
sustainability manager
sustainability
van
manager
Nike.
who ran
Daar
ahead
hebben
of
ze
the
zelfs een
troops and
hele
thus even got
sector
an
mee
entire sector
geholpen.
moving. We're
We
talking in
spreken
2015. I'm talking about
2015.
Nike's sustainability manager,
Ik heb het over de sustainability manager van Nike, die toen
who was
in het
then one of the
eerste
first to be
heel
very explicit
expliciet
about his
CO2 aan het meten
CO2 and
was.
measuring and at
En
one
op een
point
gegeven
had
moment
his
zijn
hands
handen
in
in
his
het haar
hair.
zat. Want zei, ja,
Because
in mijn
said
eigen
yes.
scope
In my own
ben ik al
scope,
heel
I've come a
ver,
long
maar
way
kan
and
ik
I
geen
can't take big
grote
steps
stappen
anymore.
zetten.
He struggled with that. Was
Hij
looking.
worstelde daarmee, was op zoek,
Went for a run and
begon te
then came
rennen
across a
en kwam
cruise
toen
ship
een
in
cruiseschip
Rotterdam and
tegen in
said, "What a
Rotterdam. En zei, wat
fantastic
een
ship." And
fantastisch
someone
schip.
else said, "Yes,
En
that's a
die ander
fantastic
zei, ja,
ship.
dat is een fantastisch
But
schip, maar
know
ik
that the
weet dat
CO2 emissions of this cruise
de
ship that is lying here on the
CO2-uitstoot van
quay,
dit
higher
cruiseschip
than
wat
all
je aan de
cars in
kade ligt,
Rotterdam."
hoger is dan
He
alle
ran
auto's.
on and he came up with if that
Wij
applies to a
rennen
cruise
door.
ship, that may
En
also apply to
als dat
shipping.
voor een cruiseschip geldt, geldt dat wellicht ook voor de scheepvaart. Hij deed daar
He
onderzoek naar en
investigated
zag dat
this and
17
saw that
schepen
17
net zoveel
seagoing ships emit as much
CO2 uitstoten als
CO2
alle
as all
auto's in
cars
Rotterdam.
combined.
En
And Nike went
ging
has
van
gone
dus
from air to
lucht
shipping to
naar
save
scheepvaart gegaan
CO2
om
and
die
suddenly
CO2 te
saw a
besturen.
whole,
En zag
very
ineens
big
een
chance to take a
hele
few more
grote
steps.
kans
But they
om
thought it
nog
would
wat te
take a lot of
doen.
innovations.
En zij dachten, er zijn legio innovaties
He met an
mogelijk.
innovator and said yes.
Hij kwam
These innovations are all there.
een
But that
innovator
shipping world
tegen
doesn't
en
want
zei, ja,
it.
die innovaties zijn er allemaal, maar die scheepvaartwereld die wil niet.
In the
Je hebt
shipping
in de
world, you have a story
scheepvaartwereld
where
een
you see that
verhaal
you
waar
have
je
flags of
zo,
convenience. Most
je
of it
hebt
takes
flags of
place at sea.
convenience, het
That is
gemak
not from a
leeft. Je speelt
country.
zich af op
And as a
zee.
shipping
Dat is niet
company,
van een
you can
land.
just sit in
En je kan een
Mongolia, where the
scheepvaartmaatschappij gewoon
CO2
in
rules and
Mongolië
reporting
hebben,
legislation
zodat
are
die
not so strict yet.
registrapportage
So there
wetgeving
is a
niet zo
lot of room
strikt
for
is.
doing
Er
nothing.
is heel veel ruimte om niks te doen. Maar Nike is een van de grootste scheepvaartklanten. Op basis van hun data en op basis
But
van de
Nike is one of the largest shipping
scheepvaartdata
customers based on
hebben
data
zij
and based on that
gezegd,
shipping data.
weet je
At
wat?
one point they said, you know
Wij
what? We
zetten
are
een
issuing a
tender
tender
uit
for that
voor dat
shipping company that wants to be
scheepvaartbedrijf
CO2
om
neutral over the
CO2-neutraal wil
years.
zijn in
Because that does
Rotterdam.
something for our
Dan doet dat
reports,
voor onze
which we will
rapportages,
probably have to
die we dan
formally
straks
report
pas
later,
formeel
but
moeten
also does
rapporteren.
something for the
Maar
world.
doet ook voor
And
de hele
suddenly, the
wereld.
shipping world started
En
moving.
ineens kwam de
And that's how it
scheepvaartwereld
happened.
in beweging. En zo geschiedde. Nike heeft dus als een van de eerste in de wereld
So
een schip
Nike was one of the
op water
first in the
zien
world to launch a
gelanceerd. En heeft
hydrogen-powered
daarmee
ship
de
and thus
hele
set the
markt
entire market in
gerevolutioneerd.
motion.
En sinds deze beweging
And since
heeft de
this movement,
scheepvaartmarkt
the
zich
shipping
ook
market has
committeerd
also
aan
committed to Paris
Parijs-doelen en
goals
willen
and wants to be
CO2-neutraal
CO2
zijn.
neutral.
Met
With
de
Nike's measurement
measurable
methods,
van Nike.
what I really want to
Wat
say
ik
here
hier
is
eigenlijk mee wil zeggen is dat alle
that all
luisteraars
listeners
hier
here
op
can make a
basis van
serious
data
impact within your company
serieuze
based
impact
on
kunnen
data,
maken.
within
Binnen
your
je
market and
bedrijf,
also within this
binnen je
world.
markt
And we all have that
en ook binnen
momentum.
deze
If we
wereld.
don't
En
do
wij
it,
hebben met
who
z'n
does it
allen
then? And if we
dat
don't do it
momentum.
now, when
Als
do we
wij
do
het
it
niet
then?
doen, wie doet het dan wel? En als we het niet nu doen, wanneer doen we het dan wel? En deze
And I
basis wil ik
actually want to
eigenlijk
lay
met een
this
mooi
basis for the
gesprek
wonderful
met
conversations that will take
u
place here over the
laten
next
zien,
hour,
waarin
where
je
you
de
get the tools to
handvaten
make that
krijgt
difference
met
with data.
data dat
Thank
je
you so
kan
much. Wow, Anki.
dankjewel.
Thank you for your contribution.
Nou,
Yes.
dankjewel voor jouw
I
bijdrage.
would now like to give the floor to René
Ja, ik wil
Heimskamp.
nu graag het woord aan René Heimskamp geven. Hij is Head of National Accounts
Tim or
voor
national accounts
Renewi
within
voor de
Renewi for the
Benelux.
Benelux,
En
and he's
hij
going to
gaat jullie
take you in Waste
meenemen in
Doesn't
hoe
Exist.
afvalbestaat
How to work
hoe
together,
je
when it comes to a
samen,
bit of
als
source
het gaat om een
separation,
stukje
can make a
bronscheiding,
difference.
het
Thank you
verschil
so
kan
much.
maken.
And René,
Dankjewel
the
en
word is
René, het
yours.
woord is aan jou.
Yes. Thank you, Gilbert, and a very warm welcome and a very good morning. From my side, too. Yes. Waste does not exist. Together, we make a difference.
Samen maken we het verschil. Ik denk dat het heel belangrijk is om aan te geven dat afval bestaat niet echt iets.
I think it is very important to say that waste does not really exist, is not something that is in the DNA of the Renewi employee and. I also think that we also have that basis very well organized. And the basis of that whole thing is of course very important to our customers, already making an impact based on sustainability. I think that's also good to walk through some of those elements. What exactly is the basis of waste? Does not mean. First of all, of course, we have an enormously extensive range of services. I always say we actually do everything but nuclear and explosive. We would like to leave that to others. But we always have a suitable solution for all your waste. For every type of company. Actually, for almost every sector and actually every type of waste type. You can always stick to that. And we ensure that we set up our services for that. But what we see as a feature of our company is also important. It is huge that we have a national network. We are focusing this seminar or webinar today, on the Netherlands. But we see that we certainly also have a very extensive network in Belgium. When I look at the Netherlands with Pure, we have more than 70 storage and transfer locations. Locations that are close to our customers, so that the transport distance is actually kept to a minimum. In addition, we also have more than 20 processing locations with various types. We have composting plants. We have fermentation plants. We make organic LNG in Amsterdam. But what is of course very nice is that we have construction and demolition lines and also very nice lines in mind, where we recycle hard plastics and ensure that very high quality flows come out. So in short, we also invest at the back of sustainability, and our customers immediately benefit from that. What is also very important is that, as an organization, we have an enormous fleet of trucks to serve our customers. Of course, this results in an enormously high route density. So we're really close to our customers and our customers are also close to each other. So that also means that we can make very maximum use of fuel and that we have to travel minimal kilometers per stop. But what is also very important is that we also have a replacement policy where we are actually now fully committed to electric vehicles and, of course, using electric vehicles has a very good scope 1 and 2 impacts on our company. And our customers also benefit directly from that. In addition, we also work together in the market. You may see them driving in the cities of Green Collective. This is actually a collective of waste companies that want to collect and that combine routes. And we don't just combine that to make it financially better. Not. Certainly we also do this because we also want to ensure that we create a cleaner and safer environment. Fewer cars in the street and minimal CO2 emissions and a maximum route density. We already see here that we have actually driven almost 4 million kilometers less since the introduction. And I think that when you express that, that means that's 95 laps around the world. So when you look at that, then you can also check what kind of impact that is. And we also see that we have already been able to prevent 10 million kilograms of CO2 emissions there. We are already doing this in more than 30 municipalities and actually all major cities. And this is still being rolled out. And we're also going to do this outside the city. Purely to at least make more impact on being able to maximize route density and certainly minimizing CO2 emissions. What is also a very important fact is that actually all these elements that I just mentioned here, all of which will also be visible in our My Renewi portal. We have already given a shorty webinar once. I think many of you may have looked into that as well. It is also still available. So definitely recommended to take a look at that. But actually, all these elements are also included in our reports in the portal and they are also fully CO2 compliant. And there is also a derivative for this for the SME market, so small business market. That, too, is all compliant. Because what is the beauty of our car that we have? Have that developed and calculated completely independently and scientifically by leading companies. We see CO2 emissions here. That was outsourced by us to TNO. He really looked for us what are the actual CO2 emissions of individual waste streams. We did the same on the basis of circularity. To do this, we had the recycling rates fully calculated throughout the entire chain. And we had Dwarsheet Rick Verhage and Royal Haskoning do that. We have thus been able to ensure that it is also immediately auditable. And that is also something that our customers need. Especially our larger clients with a mandatory requirement have data from us that they can immediately extract from their consultants. In short, we've actually arranged it very well. Here we also see the portal and that is also the basis. What we're also making an impact with from today and that's also where we'd like to take you along. But a very important fact is, of course, source separation. We hear that you will soon. When we look at source separation, we are mainly focusing on residual waste. Reducing residual waste is a very important commitment for us. And why? A residual waste has the highest CO2 emissions per ton of waste and has a very low circularity. But besides that, there is another phenomenon at residual waste. And that has to do with price developments in the coming years. There are huge taxes imposed by the government on top. So it's actually extremely important for all of us to make sure that we produce less and more residual waste and have more and more recyclable flows left over. EcoSmart is part of this within Renewi that focuses entirely on this. Here in the picture, we also see a clear picture of a waste lab. So what is a tissue lab? In a lab, we're actually going to look at the residual waste that you still have as a customer. And together, we will determine how many recyclable streams are actually still in it. And that's how we also identify the potential for improvement. And you'll see all of that in the portal if you really make progress. So in short, please see what's in your residual waste. And I think that a lot of companies that have taken this step are actually quite shocked, and also that there is a lot of waste in it, which was actually also purchased. So that kind of thing is very important to us. Well, how are you going to make sure that you also get people to do their divorce better at source? Yes. Then we need to look at the collection resources. Make sure we really have good collection resources with the right signing. And that we will also see how that content collection takes place. Ensure that we have the right bins in the right places with the right information for users. And then it will be very interesting indeed. And we can also continue working with waste coaches. We work with gamification that we can bring in very nice things such as an ALS, for example, an AI tool, a game for our customers, to take with you, to create awareness and awareness. We use green assistants in healthcare. They help, for example, to separate operating rooms even better. In this way, there are a lot of options.
En het allerbelangrijkste zit er natuurlijk in het feit dat ergens zijn er situaties waar het niet meer perfect is om te kunnen scheiden.
And the most important thing, of course, lies in the fact that there are situations where it is no longer perfect to divorce and where behavior and awareness have reached a realistic limit. And yet, there are opportunities to do so. And yes, what if you want to make even more impact on top of a well-regulated basis and source separation? Well, let's ask that question to Alice. And I hope she can explain that we can actually do that tomorrow. Everything. Thank you, René.
Dankjewel, René.
I'm Alice Skimmelpenninck, responsible for sustainability at Renewi. Additional impact in your value chain. Before I dive into exactly what Circular is, I wanted to take a moment to reflect on the why behind Circular Plus. Indeed, in several conversations with our customers, we found out that there is a central need. Give us insight into the impact with CO2 and circularity of our waste, but also develop improvement initiatives, options that allow me to make a measurable impact. And that impact can improve. So the need is the same, but the motives are different. Because we spoke to corporates that are driven by laws and regulations. So we say we have to. This is, for example, by quarter or EU taxonomy. For example, that a construction company says we need to show that we offer so much separately for recycling. A second target group is the target group that has set its own sustainability goals, because there is an intrinsic motivation. They say it fits into our DNA. This is who we are. It's our competitive distinctiveness. These are companies that, for example, choose to report or set those targets according to the VSM. Then there is a third group. I remember well talking to a hospital who said, "It's the way we do it." This sustainability manager said that. With us, our visitors, so our patients and employees, require that we act as sustainably as possible. So different motives, but the need to make a further impact. That one is right. René just said it. The basis is, it is an important starting point. A national network, route density, efficient driving, fuel, efficient and always insight into the impact. Through my Renewi.
En altijd inzicht in de impact via my Renewi. En dan sorteren op de werkvloer.
And then
blijft
sorting in the workplace
essentieel
remains essential
om
to make the best
te maken
impact in
voor,
terms of CO2.
op gebied van
Circularity and Circular Plus
circulariteit.
cannot replace that.
Circulair Plus kan dat niet vervangen.
Circular Plus is the add-on to bringing impact within reach that would otherwise be out of your reach. Circular Plus people. Today we're going live. It is a very important milestone for us. Very excited about this day. We're going live with the landing page today, so we're going to see it too. So it's a first for you. Additional impact. Your choice. Easy to implement? Well, what solutions do we offer then? This is a starting point. We are here. We have 3 that we are now going to share with you. But there are more in the works. So it's not exhaustive yet. To get started, Circular Plus Transport. If you saw it before, we have efficient Euro 6 trucks.
Dus u zagen eerder, we hebben efficiënte Euro 6 trucks, maar nu kunt u ervoor kiezen dat het.
But now you can choose to have the equivalent of your waste collected with an electric truck or a truck that runs on biofuel. So low emission transport. The second Circular Plus wood.
De tweede Circulair Plus hout.
This is specifically relevant for customers who release large volumes of wood who want to work on their circularity. Namely, the wood goes to recycling. Third Circular Plus residual waste. Instead of going to incineration where energy is generated, you can now choose to have your residual waste equivalent go to a sorting installation. How does it work then? A very important principle throughout. The whole concept of Circular Plus is the mass balance principle. This ensures that it becomes financially and operationally workable.
Dat betekent dat een equivalent van uw kilometers of van uw tonnen afval door u gekozen manier worden.
This means that the equivalent of your kilometers or tons of waste are processed or collected by the way you choose and lower CO2 emissions or the higher recycling rate. You can then follow them exactly in my review in the monthly reports. What is that then? That mass balance principle? Actually, no different than your energy contract. I purchase green energy because I want to promote the transition to climate-neutral energy use. But that does not mean that electricity from a local windmill will necessarily come out of my socket. And so it is with Circular Plus. After 12 months, you will receive a certificate showing the cumulative impact that has been made on CO2 or circularity or increased recycling. This is the result of a complex accounting system that we developed in collaboration with KPMG, and that has been verified by an independent party. So Charbel will tell you a bit more about that in a moment. Finally, not unimportant, the proceeds from Circular Plus go back to electric vehicles. HVO leaves infra and the increase of our recycling capacity. When it comes to transport, we have 2 tastes.
Bij transport hebben we 2 smaken. U kunt kiezen voor transport op.
You can opt for biofuel transport HVO 100 biofuel or you can opt for transport with electric cars. The equivalent of your mileage is output by one of the 2 to your choice. And that therefore has a serious CO2 impact. As you can see, about 1 kilogram. Almost a kilo with HVO 100 biofuel and more than a kilo with electric transport per kilometer. I found that myself. I remember reading that the first time. 1 kilogram of CO2 per kilometer was very appealing to me. Yes, very telling. That means you can simply make an impact quickly. At Hout, it is usually the case that it goes to the biomass plant in the Netherlands, where heat is therefore generated efficiently. If circularity is an important issue for you, so you can now choose that the equivalent of your wood waste is guaranteed not to go to incineration, but to a recycling facility in the Benelux. Our partner achieves a recycling rate of 90%. That means that there is still 10% residue. That is at an all-time high in the recycling business. This may also be a good time to say that we are also looking at impact here, not just from Renewi itself, so within our operational limits, but that we're really watching. We will continue to maintain the impact in the value chain. What material preservation is there? So in this case, the 90% is the result of our partner that we have considered here. There is also no reduction in Scope 3 emissions.
Er staat ook geen
You
vermindering
may
van
think,
scope 3
but it gets
emissies.
burned
Misschien
first
denk
and
je,
then
hè,
it goes to
bijvoorbeeld als het
recycling.
verbrandt,
Isn't there
dan
supposed
gaat
to
het
be an
naar
emission reduction?
recycling.
And that is
Dat moet
true.
toch een emissiereductie zijn. En dat klopt.
Only it has to
Alleen
do with how
het
the
heeft te maken
impact
met
data was
de manier
calculated
waarop
with
de
TNO at the
impact
time.
data die
This
zijn
does not include
berekend met
biogenic
TNO.
emissions.
Daarbij zijn biogene emissies buiten beschouwing gelaten.
Wood is biogenic,
Hout
so
is
we have
biogeen
no
en
emissions that
dus
we can
hebben we
claim
geen
here.
emissies die we hier kunnen
Then residual
claimen.
waste. Residual
Dan
waste also
restafval.
usually goes to a waste
Restafval
power
wordt in
plant in the
Nederland
Netherlands,
doorgaans naar
where
afval-
energy is generated very
energiecentrales, waar
efficiently.
heel efficiënt,
However, that is of
energie
course a
wordt
shame.
opgewekt. Toch is dat natuurlijk heel zonde. Dus als u belangrijk vindt dat er meer
So
materialen
if you think it's
worden
important to
behouden,
preserve more
en
materials and
CO2 wordt
reduce
gereduceerd
CO2
door
through more circular
verwerking
processing
van
of the
het
residual
afval,
waste,
dan is
then
dit,
this is definitely the solution. We are still
absoluut
working on a
de zin.
small scale
We
here,
zijn hier
but we have now
op een
started
kleine
sorting
schaal
out from
bezig,
scratch.
maar
Here
we
you
zijn
see a
inmiddels ook
circularity
al
increase of
uitgevoerd van alle. Je ziet hier een
26%.
stijging
You
van
will think,
circulariteit
they
van
only get
26%.
26% out of that.
Je zult u
They
denken,
get a
ze
lot
halen
more
er
out of
maar
that.
26%
But again,
uit. Ze halen daar veel meer uit. Maar again, we kijken naar de hele keten.
we look at the
Dus
entire
moeten we
chain
kijken
and
wat
so we
wordt er
have to see what is sorted
uitgesorteerd
out
en
and what
wat
happens
gebeurt
to
er
those sorted
vervolgens met die
fractions next.
uitgesorteerde
Do they all
fracties.
go to recycling, and
Gaan
if
die
so,
allemaal naar
that next
recycling?
party, what
En
kind
zo
of
ja,
material
de
does he
volgende
still
partij,
keep?
welk materiaalbehoud weet die nog te houden? Dus we kijken naar de hele waardeketen.
So we look at the
En
whole
dan
value
zien we
chain and then we see that
onderaan de
at the
streep
bottom
dat
of the line,
26% echt
26%
naar
really
de
goes to
recycling
recycling.
gaat.
Should you
Kan je
imagine that wet
voorstellen dat
paper,
nat
for
papier
example, what is sorted
bijvoorbeeld,
out,
wat
is
eruit
no
is
longer
gesorteerd,
suitable for
niet meer
recycling and
geschikt is
still
voor
goes to an
recycling,
incineration
alsnog
plant?
naar een verbrandingsinstallatie gaat?
So that
Dus op
way,
die manier
20%
26%
recycling of the
van
entire value
de
chain on
hele
residual
waardeketen
waste
op
after
restafval gaan
sorting.
sorteren.
Then there is also a reduction in
Dan
scope
is er
3
ook een
emissions.
vermindering van scope
Because,
3
of
emissies,
course,
want
we're
we
going to
moeten
burn less.
minder
This
verbranden.
reduction is 26 kilograms of
Die reductie
CO2 per
is
ton.
26 kilo
So
CO2
good.
per ton.
Do you want to make additional impact? Then you can do that well with Circular Plus.
Wilt u extra
The
impact
basis
maken?
remains essential.
Dan kan dat goed met Circulair Plus.
Sorting
De basis
properly at the source is the best thing you can do. But do you want to make additional impact? Further down the chain. Engage with the supplier,
Extra
with
impact
us.
maken verder in de keten. Ga dialoog aan met de leverancier, met ons. Want
Because
dan,
then with
met
Circular
Circulair
Plus,
Plus
that
worden
step
die
becomes
stappen
electable and
zichtbaar
workable
en
and measurable.
bruikbaar en
So far my
meetbaar.
story. Then I
Tot
think I
zover
can
mijn
give the
verhaal.
floor to Charbel.
Dan mag ik volgens mij het woord gaan geven aan
Thank you,
Charbel.
Alice, for your presentation.
Dankjewel,
And
Alice,
I
voor
see that
jouw
the cameras are
presentatie.
rolling by in front of me in the
Ik zie dat de
meantime,
camera's
so that's totally
ondertussen
fine.
voor mij langsrollen, dus dat is helemaal goed.
Before I announce
Voordat ik
Charbel, I would like to come back to two
aankondig, wil ik
questions that were
twee
asked.
vragen
The first
terugkomen die
question
gesteld
was,
zijn.
will the
De eerste
presentation also
vraag
be
was,
shared? It's the
wordt deze
PowerPoint
presentatie
presentation.
gedeeld? Dat is
Well, the PowerPoint presentation itself is not shared.
presentatie zelf
However, it
wordt
is
niet
possible.
gedeeld.
And that was the second
Dus
question to
eventueel
watch the
mogelijk, dat was
broadcast.
de tweede
So
vraag
next
om de
week, you'll
uitzending
get,
terug
if
te
you have
kijken.
subscribed,
Dus
there is a
volgende
link to
week
all of
krijgen
them.
jullie, als je je hebt ingeschreven, allemaal een linkje.
That's
Daar
111
krijg
links
je
to
een
YouTube,
linkje naar
so you can
YouTube.
watch the
En dan
webinar
kun je dus
again.
het webinar
Or you can share it with a
terugkijken.
colleague.
Of je
None of
kunt
that
het
matters.
delen met
But
een
you can watch
collega.
the
Dat maakt
webinar
allemaal
again.
niet uit.
Yes.
Maar je kunt het webinar dus terugkijken.
And in the meantime, a
Ondertussen
Charbel
staat de
slide is
van,
on it and I would like to
Charbel
give
erop en
Charbel
ik
the
ga
floor.
Charbel het woord geven,
That,
want hij gaat
because he's
laten
going to
zien
show how
hoe
that
het
MRV system contributes to that.
bijdraagt
All
aan,
day.
ja,
That Circular Plus
dat
that it is
hele
audit proof
circulair
and that you
plus
can
dat
really
het
claim that
auditable is
impact.
en dat je die impact echt mag claimen. Charbel, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gilbert, and good morning, all. Now we switch to English, and in the next 10-15 minutes, I would like to explain indeed what underpins what Alice just mentioned and how we supported Renewi actually build the solution, but more importantly, build the system behind the solution that guarantees the credibility, that guarantees the trust for their customers, that what they are getting is actual impacts that they can rely on. And we know that today, with a lot of controversies in the market, companies are always asking us, how can we avoid greenwashing? Before we go into details, let me first please explain what we are talking about. We are talking about a carbon insetting, which is a new terminology in the market. Many of you might know already about carbon offsetting, and I'm sure you have heard about the controversies that has been around carbon offsetting. But what we are talking about here is something different. To explain a little bit, carbon offsetting usually works by you buying a credit from anywhere in the world in order to neutralize or to balance your emissions. So in a way, you can increase your emissions as much as you want as long as you buy more credits, so the balance is zero. Now, for climate change, for the environment, this is not very good, because what we need actually, we need actual reductions and not only balancing plus minus somewhere. This is where carbon insetting comes in, because in carbon insetting, supply chain partners becomes part of a same system. And this system leads to actual reductions. So to explain, if a company reduces its emissions, it can share the benefits with their, let's say, clients. So the scope 1 and 2 of the reduction by a company X becomes the reduction of scope 3 of the client Y, which means that supply chains partners becomes also partners in actual reductions of greenhouse gas emission or actual impact of sustainability in general. Now, this is, as I mentioned, it's a new concept in the market in order to move away from carbon offsetting, where companies cannot control the type of projects where the impact happens, to a framework where companies like you can decide within their sphere of influence, because you look within your value chain, what type of impact you want to achieve, by whom, and to what extent. And this is where, as you can see on the graph, the actual impact or the actual reduction, in this case in greenhouse gas emission, are shared between you and your supply chain partner. Now, in order to have this idea, again, we need credibility, we need trust, and we need transparency. This is why insetting is underpinned by, let's say, 3 fundamentals. First, it needs to be clear. So the description of the service or the solution should be clear and should be consistent and should be the same for all. The second one, it needs to have or be underpinned, be anchored to principles that are already in place. And the third, it needs to be verified. Let me explain one by one. A carbon offsetting is basically a service or a product offered by a company, but this service or a product has positive sustainability impact. Now, the positive sustainability impact needs to be defined, it needs to be clear, and it needs to be the same for any other customer. It cannot change between customers. It cannot change between the times. It cannot change between basically the days. This is why having a strong narrative and a clear narrative is very important, not only for you to understand what you are contributing to, but in order to maintain this consistency throughout the system. So for example, in Renewi case, and I will explain a bit more later on, in Renewi case is very simple. Renewi today operates the majority of their trucks on diesel. They would like, or they are investing in order to make their trucks more environmentally friendly by electrifying them or running them on biofuel, as Alice mentioned, right? There is a differential in doing so, and this differential means sustainability benefits. Now, in order to offer those benefits to their customers, right, there need to be principle. First, there need to be operational principle, which means that the customer should be a customer of Renewi. They cannot offer it to someone who's outside the Renewi, let's say, network. Second, it needs to be clear what is the customer contributing to, because as Renewi is investing in order to improve their operations, the customer is also investing in order to support, in this case, Renewi. So there are financial principles also determined in the system. And the third, there are commercial principles, because what is being offered is part of the contractual agreement between, basically, in this case, again, Renewi and you. And those principles are not outside the current relationship that companies have, but they are an add-on to an existing relationship. I can go in a lot of detail technically, but given the time and for now, I will mention very briefly how things work, and I'm happy to take later on some question during the panel. So, for example, if Renewi have all their operation already on electric trucks, they cannot come and offer this service as an addition, because it's already part of their business as usual. So in setting work when the service or the product being offered is not a business as usual, is an addition or is a different to business as usual. This is an example of a commercial principle. A financial principle means that either the greenhouse gas emissions or the increased circularity rate is being monetized according to a clear tracking. So 1 ton of CO2 or a liter of biofuel has a premium over a liter of diesel, and this premium is also translated into a financial premium that customers can contribute to. And the third thing is, as I mentioned, is a commercial principle, which means that the contract that governs the relationship between two supply chain partners also governs what clients are getting through this in-setting service. And those principles are clear, they are transparent, and they are available to be shared with customers. So it's not a black box within Renewi, for example, or within companies that cannot be looked at and they cannot be shared with customers. But still, there is a lot of technicalities in the system, and not every customer is able to sometimes read or really digest all the technicalities. This is why, on top of that, we ask a third-party verifier that is not KPMG, that is not the company that is offering the service, but it's another company specialized in verifying these type of services to come and check the system we have built, and later on, periodically, verify the sustainability impact generated and passed to customers. So in this case, after we have built with Renewi the monitoring, reporting, and verification system, and we have built the documentation, we have asked a third party to come and check. And basically, they have run a very rigorous process that has taken several months in order to ensure that the system is solid, the back office is being established in order to run as basically is supposed to run, and later on, once the sustainability benefits are generated, they will come and check that actually those sustainability benefits have been generated and they are allocated correctly, so there is no double counting. And I know many of you really wonder or have a concern on double counting. But because we are limited to the supply chain, let's say 1 kilometer driven is 1 kilometer allocated. It cannot be more, because simply the system is physically defined. So now, how can this turn into Renewi? Alice has already explained, but I will touch base very briefly on that. First, the description of the service. So Renewi, again, is basically investing in order to improve the sustainability performance of their trucks by moving from diesel either to electrification or to biofuel. By doing so, there is a differential in the greenhouse gas emitted, because biofuel or electric vehicle emit less and far less than diesel trucks. Also, Renewi would like to increase the recyclability rate of the waste they collect. And in doing so, they need to invest in more facilities that can basically recycle more waste or different type of waste. This investment has tangible sustainability benefits. Those benefits are basically offered to their customer that can choose. Some customer would like to have electric vehicles. Some customer would like to have biofuel. Some customers say, you know what? I don't want a change in the truck, but I would like my waste to be recycled more. So this menu of services becomes also available to you in order to choose. You have the flexibility to determine which service you would like, and according to what you choose, the sustainability benefits and your impact is determined accordingly. Now, from there on, once you determine, basically, let's say I would like my waste to be collected on electric trucks. Now, in reality, you might not have an electric truck going to every single office of yours, but there will be an electric truck for sure on the road collecting waste from someone else. But the kilometer driven by this electric truck will be allocated to your waste collection, which means as if your waste is being collected by an electric truck. In order to make sure that this happens, a system is built within Renewi in order to track this data, to collect and track and maintain this data. But as I mentioned, periodically, a third independent party will come in, will open the books, will do an audit to make sure that the trucks have run the kilometer they have run, the kilometer are monitored, they are captured correctly, and they are allocated correctly. Think about it like a financial audit, but in this case, they do an audit for the services that Renewi are offering you. And then for each benefit, a certificate is being generated that Renewi can share with you. And this certificate specifies very clearly the type of service, specifies very clearly what you have achieved, and specifies very clearly the benefit that has been generated. And this certificate usually is stamped, but also has a unique number, unique identifier, because it goes into also a system where these can be tracked. So then there will be a code and on the identifier for each of these certificates in order to be tracked so there is no double counting. Now, many of you might be asking, okay, but how is this system being built? And we have not seen standard or methodology out there that really specifies insetting. And this is actually true, because as I mentioned at the beginning, insetting is a new idea in the market. However, there are already grounded principles like the greenhouse gas protocol, like the ISO standard, that we use in order to build a robust methodology combining them. And today, the greenhouse gas protocol and the ISO standard are working on developing specific standards and methodology for these type of services. But since we don't have these yet, what we do is we combine the principles and the calculation methodologies of these standards in order to build the MRV system, the monitoring, reporting, and verification system. And as I mentioned, this system is not only built on CREER principle, but relies on actual operational data collected within Renewi and monitored. Then we turn these data into sustainability benefit through clear methodologies that are internationally recognized. Then there is an allocation process, because as I said, 1 kilometer is 1 kilometer. A ton of recycled waste is a ton of allocated waste. Then there is a verified system in place. But more important, the system is not rigid. The system can evolve, because if Renewi today would like to invest in a new service, the system can be expanded. if there is a new legislation or regulation in a certain country that makes a certain service a business as usual, then Renewi cannot offer it. So again, the system can continuously improve. This is where I would like to finish. And again, there is a lot of technicalities behind that, and I'm happy to answer them during the panel. Back to you, Gilbert.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Charbel.
If you have any questions about Charbel Mouse's piece, ask them please. A lot of questions are already coming in. Really good questions about why. That we don't all do this by default and stuff. Well, great. René and Annelies will come back to that extensively in the Q&A later. But first, I'd like to give Ankie the floor. Annelies and René, and they will deal with a number of 3 practical cases. Ankie, yes. Well, nice to have us sitting here.
Nou, fijn dat we hier zitten. We hebben echt 3 fantastische.
We really have 3 fantastic cases to discuss and also 3 completely different companies with a completely different motivation. So I'd like to start with you with the first case. And that's the NS with a fantastic quote that I can put nicely on the screen here.
Die ik hier mooi op het scherm kan zetten.
What the NS actually says in this quote is that the supply chain and sustainability are an important goal, but that it must be reliable and scalable. That is a very sturdy one. Practical precondition that you may often see in large companies. René, do you recognize this? Yes. Well, yes. I certainly recognize this, and certainly also with the Dutch railways. That's also one of the companies that I think started talking to about this topic 3 years ago. And we knew that we were also going more to electric vehicles. The Dutch railways also has experience with this with other suppliers, but actually not in the area of waste collection yet. So that also helped us to really think about that, to accelerate. But indeed, what you say, the Dutch railways did have 2 very important elements in it. It must be reliable. NS must also project a reliable image. Let's put that first. But perhaps even more importantly, it must also be verifiable. So audits can be audited and also simply comply with all the issues surrounding them. Actually, what we just heard from KPMG, we have created a very robust way of Circular Plus, which actually fully meets the requirements that the Dutch railways also set for it. And you recognize that too. That customers look at Circular Plus the way the NS does in this case? Yes, absolutely. The great thing about the NS is that they are, of course, a logistics company. So it's very close to their waters. Just say that they also want to green their supply chain on logistics. So I already really like that about the NS. And of course, it has to be right, because they can run absolutely no risk. So they were the driving force behind us to develop this and organize it so thoroughly. I also think that right away, yes, is really different. Yes. Then maybe a smaller transporter, and it's just harder to fully rig it up for that. So we are extremely grateful to the NS with their questions. From the very beginning, those who brought us stimulated us to develop such a system. Yes. And the NS refers here to the mass balance principle. And that mass balance principle. How does that make sustainability practical? You have to imagine that there are 400 stations in the Netherlands. Yes. It's impossible for us to make our route efficient with our electric trucks. René has previously appointed it. That is an incredibly important KPI for Renewi. It actually says that when we drive a route, that we do as many stops as possible on that one route, so that you drive as few kilometers as possible. Yes. If you are then going to make exceptions by operating all stations separately with electric trucks, then you immediately become very inefficient. So that mass balance principle makes it, yes, as Remco says, so operational, but also financially workable. Because, of course, it will be unaffordable to just use trucks for those NS stations. Because each stream is also collected differently, needs a different service. So the mass balance principle ensures that it is possible and that it is scalable. And do you see that scalability in many customers who also find it so important? That basis is so well in order? Yes, definitely. Look, and of course, it's also true that it's not so much that the Dutch railways and other customers are just looking at Circular Plus product what we have. These types of companies are also simply intrinsically working on everything related to prove that. Even at the stations when we talk about the NS, we were there at the time, when we won the contract. It has also been a very long-term collaboration, because you can't do it all overnight either. You can shape. So it's really in these kinds of companies, in their daily mind. And the important thing is, it is also simply worn by the board within the Dutch railways and then you actually see that you can really take steps and you will come to these kinds of opportunities together. So yes, making an impact at scale, but also with credible and reliable data. Absolutely beautiful. I'm going to a completely different customer testimonial, namely Van Wertelboer. And I also think this is a very nice one, because this one is there. You're looking at your cooperation in a completely different way. After all, it's about DNA and intrinsic motivation. Do you see the difference between customers? They should and want, or are. Customers often have both customers who want that. These are the very nice conversations. Yes, because I always say when you want this kind of thing, then that's what you have to do. And whether you are a small company or a large company, you can't ask us that. And we are running, just to say it. We make it all happen. That's sustainability, ambition. You really have to come up with a plan for that together. Watching it together and also wanting it together. If one of the two companies does not put enough energy into it, then it doesn't work either. So companies that want, and that's the great thing, these are companies that also want to stand out. Often go to the market and they say, for us, it's also very important to show that we embrace sustainability. That we want to position a sustainability image. That can already be done by hanging this certificate in the store, for example. There are simply companies that really care about that. We are already working with waste profiles where people can see how well they already separate. So this kind of stuff on top of it helps a lot. It also creates pride in such a company. Absolutely. And support within such a company as well. That everyone is also working on that. In addition, of course, you have companies you just said, those who need to. Yes, and that's where it's really important to explain that if you're like, you have to somehow, that's only possible if you also want a little bit. If you want a little too. Yes, absolutely. Yes. So do you explain it differently? Circular plus. With one such customer who has it all in their DNA, then with another one. Well, it is indeed what René says. The conversation will be much easier. Do you explain it differently? Not necessarily, because the need is still measurable. Verifiable? Of course, it's different when you talk to a corporate ESG specialist and the entrepreneur behind a smaller company. So that is indeed a bit of a different conversation. But ultimately, it comes down to making an impact. And CO2 is now really a widely understood concept. And the same for circularity. And I think that is also an advantage that Renewi has. The waste is such a visible problem that people also experience an emotion about, but it should be processed as well as possible. So that speaks a lot. And then the foundation behind it, which ensures that people understand that this is claimable, that it's true, that it has been verified. Then those are the proof points. But you need to keep communicating them consistently everywhere. Yes, so it is often a combination of wanting and then having to. In the positive sense of we need to do something about this. Because it delivers. Yes. Nice to see, and also funny that it comes from a financial officer. Because an intrinsic motivation in the DNA. Yes. Even if it's so solid in finance. You see that those benefits and that intrinsic motivation can go hand in hand. Yes. I have another quote for you.
Als het ook al bij finance zo stevig in zit, zie je dat die voordelen en die intrinsieke motivatie wel handhaven.
I have a quote from CCB Energy Technology, and they have a nice list of why they like this collaboration so much. And they also have quite a few goals. So when you look, you see transparency, waste management, performance, CO2. But you can also see that they have multiple goals at the core of their business. So from reporting and customer to operational efficiency. By the way, I don't see it on the slide. Is that true? No. That's right. Gosh. What? Maybe you'd like to name him once. Me? Well, good of you to say it. Thank you so much for that. I have the text here and it's a long quote, so I'll read to him calmly. As we built our Scope 3
to improve both CO2 transparency and waste management performance. We expect it to play a key
baseline
role
Circular
in
Plus or a
strengthening our
variable
ESG
framework to
reporting
improve
and
CO2
operational
transparency
efficiency.
and waste management performance.
Dus wat ze zeggen is
We expect it to play a
transparency
role in our
intern,
ESG
maar ook
reporting and operational
en
efficiency
operational
going forward.
efficiency.
So what they say is transparency and
Dat is
performance,
een behoorlijk
but also
stevige
reporting and
ambitie.
operational
En
efficiency.
dat herken jij vast
That's a
wel van
pretty
eerdere
strong ambition.
doelstellingen.
Ja,
But I'm
kijk,
sure you
het
recognize that.
mooie is, het is
Multiple
heel duidelijk
goals?
een bedrijf,
Yes,
dat
definitely.
natuurlijk in the
Look,
heart of
the great thing
circularity
is,
zit, hè. Ze produceren batterijen,
this
ze
is
zijn
also
heel erg
clearly a
bezig
company
met
that, of
duurzaamheid.
course,
Hè, dat
is in the
eigenlijk
hard
een
or the
punt van het
circularity.
bedrijf.
They produce
En dit
batteries,
soort bedrijven
so they are very much
die
concerned
dat
with
zo hebben,
sustainability.
die willen dat
And that's
het
actually the
beter
whole
zijn
purpose of the
wat ze
company and.
apporteren, hè, naar
These
de
kinds of
markt, naar de
companies that have it like
klant,
that.
dat het ook
They therefore
werkelijk
want to be sure that what they
gebaseerd is op
report to the
touchpoints,
market,
hè. Dus
to their
wij hebben
customers,
samengesteld
that
door
it's actually
KPMG,
really
maar
based
ook
on
in onze
touch points.
CSRD-rapportage.
So what
Dat
we've
is
put
eigenlijk
together with
ook een
KPMG,
heel
but
belangrijk
also
voor
in our
bedrijven is
CSA, that
dat het
report,
gewoon
because
auditeerbaar is,
that's
dat het
actually what's also very
onafhankelijk is,
important for these types of
en dat
companies,
helpt
that it is
enorm
simply
dit soort bedrijven
auditable,
ook
that it's
gewoon
really
goede
independent
ESG
and that helps a
reporting
lot.
doen. Hè, dus eigenlijk is dit het
These types of
allerbelangrijkste
companies are
wat je
also
doet,
simply included in their
dat
ESG
wij
reporting that they
voor
need
welk
to
type
do.
bedrijf dan
So
ook,
actually,
of je
this
dat
is the
heel
most important thing you
wil
see.
laten zien,
That's what we
omdat je
do for any
zelf
type of
in the
company.
heart of the
If you want to
circularity
show
zit,
that really hard,
dat we dat ook
because you are
werkelijk
also in the heart of circularity.
onafhankelijke rapportages, et cetera,
Waar kunnen
tonen. Ja,
maken.
en waar
Ja.
kunnen maken.
En toch zie ik ook dat ze naar verbetering willen. Dus
That we
iets
can
wat stel
actually
één
make and deliver
verbetering
that
is,
on the
stel
basis of
2, hoe
actual
helpt
independent reports,
Circularity er
etc.
dan in?
And yet, I also
Wij
see
zijn
that they want to
ook nog
improve.
uit
So
ontwikkeling,
insight is step
ja,
1.
dus ik
Improvement
snap
is
echt dat
step
we daar
2.
meer
So how does the
aan
Circular
moeten
Plus help with that?
toevoegen.
And of
En hierdoor
course,
ook
we
een
haven't developed
dialoog
yet with
met
Circular
elkaar.
Plus
Wat
either.
kan er beter? Hoe kan het beter
I
voor
also mentioned
innovatie?
earlier,
Samen
it is
helpen.
also a dialogue
En
with each
Circulairs
other.
zijn
What could be
allemaal
better?
vrij
How can it be
innovatieve,
better? What innovations can
alternatieven.
help us together?
Dus ik denk dat dat een
Circular Plus are all
goede
fairly
beter,
innovative
proces
alternatives.
is en dialoog.
Ja.
En ik denk
So
dat,
I think
hè,
that's a
door terug aan
yes,
jouw
a
vraag,
continuous
inderdaad,
improvement
dat
process.
is wel denk
And
ik de basis
dialogue.
voor iedere
Yes.
Circulair Plus
So I
project.
really
Niet
expect that we will be able to
moeten
add more
alleen
options to that.
een
And I still think I was just thinking about your
duurzame
question.
keuze zichtbaar moet
Indeed,
maken voor
I think that's
zijn
different for
klanten,
every
hè.
Circular Plus
Hè, want
customer,
ik heb
how they
ook
are proof
ik bracht
points,
mijn auto
what they are
vorige
like,
week naar de
are
garage en dan
are
hing
willing
daar
to
een
make its
bordje met
sustainable
link
choice
duurzame
visible to its
garage
customers again.
tegenwoordig.
Yes, because I
En dan
also
is dat
have.
inderdaad een bord
Last
aan de
week,
muur,
I brought my
terwijl,
car to the garage and
als
hung a
je meer in
sign
de
with the
keten
most
zit en je
sustainable
werkt met
garage in South
auto's, dan
Limburg.
zoek je
Something like
misschien
that.
naar
Well,
wat voor in je
then that
garage
is indeed a
past.
sign on the
Of,
wall. Whereas if it's
daar
more
zijn
in
we
your
ook
chain
op.
and you're working with corporates,
Dat zijn
then you
onze
might be looking for
ontwikkelingen
something for your
ook
annual
met
report or
ideeën of
something.
suggesties
That's where we
daarover
are,
of
too.
die
We are
zeker
still
in
developing
Ik
that.
denk dat Q&A
So if people have
zeker
ideas or
dit
suggestions
is
about
ook
that,
de ideeën
then they will
waarbij
definitely like it right away.
strategisch
Ideas?
is.
Sure.
Dat zijn
But this is
vaste
also a party
partijen
where you
waar we
see that
samen
waste
werken.
management is really
Ja,
strategic.
ik wil niet
So
zeggen
those
dat
are
het
probably
zelfs
very
een
nice parties to
hele
work
nieuwe,
with,
moeilijkere
then.
stroom en die voor dit
Yes.
soort bedrijven
It I don't
komen
want to say
maar
it.
die uitdaging gaan we heel graag aan. Maar
It
ik
is
wil
also a
inderdaad,
whole new, more difficult flows that come from these
tussen
types of companies. But
type
that
bedrijven
one, we are very
die
happy to take on
dan
that
ook heel
challenge.
goed
But it's
passen
true
bij,
that's what it
de
is.
ontwikkelingen
That's
die we
right.
ook op circulariteit en zeker Circulair Plus doormaken.
Is 111 types of companies that therefore fit very well
Als
with the
ik nu even
developments that
kijk
we
naar
also
deze
have at
drie
Circularity.
cases, dan
And
zie
certainly
ik,
go through Circular
verschillende
Plus.
motivaties,
Yes,
maar
yes,
ook een
beautiful.
oplossing die eraan
Now,
voldoet.
if I take a look at these
Betrouwbare
3 customer
data,
cases,
schaalbare
then I see different motivations,
mogelijkheden,
but also a solution that
inzicht
complies
in
with that.
verandering en
So reliable
verbetering en
data,
uiteindelijk is
scalable
het ook
capabilities,
bij
insight
strategische
into change and
leiderschap
improvement.
management je organisatie verder helpt. Volgens mij een hele mooie basis. Want
And
ik zie
ultimately,
hier
it
op
also
mijn
fits with
scherm
looking
die
strategically at
dragen
how waste
binnen
management
om
helps your organization move
vanuit
forward.
deze
In my
klantcases
opinion,
ook
a
naar
very
de
nice
market
basis.
te gaan. En daarvoor wil ik ook Gilbert vragen om
Because I
daar
see
een
questions
rol
coming in
te
here on
spelen.
my screen to also go to
Ga
those
je even
questions from these
allemaal
customer cases.
scherp
And for
Ja,
that, I
dankjewel,
also want to ask
Ankie.
Gilbert to
Ja,
play a
ook
role in that.
jou,
Because he has them all
uitleg
very
heel
sharp.
erg
I
bedankt
guess.
voor deze
Yes. Thank you.
praktijkcases.
Enki.
En we gaan
Yes.
nu even een korte stoere
I want to
dank doen
thank you
aan
everything
jij
and
voor het
Renee so
podium
much
te
for
gaan.
these
Chabel,
practice
als jij
cases.
erbij komt,
And
dan
now
ga
we're
je
going to do a
op een
short
bankje
musical
zitten.
chair. So Enki, when you go off stage Charbel, when you join, join. Then I'll sit in
Een aantal
Enki's place.
vragen de revue laten passeren. Charbel, dankjewel.
And then we are going to review a number of
Even voor
questions.
iedereen, ik zal,
Charbel.
Charbel die verstaat prima Nederlands.
Thank you
Overigens
so
kan
much
ik
for
niet
everyone.
zeggen,
I will
niet goed,
Charbel.
dus ik zal
She
de
understands
vragen
Dutch very
Charbel
well.
in het
But he says he
Engels,
doesn't speak it
stellen
very
en
well.
Charbel zal dan in het Engels vragen, maar De vragen voor Alice en René die zijn in
So I will ask the
Nederlands.
questions for Charbel Moussa in
De
English and
eerste vraag
Charbel
van
will then
online
ask in
event
English.
4
But the
via
questions for
Renewi
Alice and Renee,
of dat is
those are in
misschien,
Dutch.
dat
The
staat
first
geen
question
naam
from
bij,
your
dat is gewoon
online event
anoniem.
494. Or
Dus
that's
ga je
maybe
niet
there's
over
no
de
name on it.
494.
Then it's just an
Kun je
anonymous
deze manier
person.
ook wel afnemen terwijl je al wel
You can probably
aan
also
de klant
purchase
je afval
login number
geeft, maar ze denken dat er
494
één
this
voor
way,
jou is.
even though you are already separating your waste
Ja,
at
zeker.
source. Alice, I think that's one
Hè,
for
dus,
you. That's good.
het is
Yes,
echt heel belangrijk
definitely.
om te begrijpen
Right.
dat Circulair Plus niet op zichzelf staat. Hè, je kunt ook niet Circulair
So
Plus
it's really
gebruiken als je
important
geen
to understand
Renewi-klant
that
bent.
Circular
Hè,
Plus
heel
does
belangrijk
not
dat je
stand
weet. Het is
alone.
echt
You also
anti-roof.
cannot use Circular Plus if you are not a
Uiteraard
Renewi
dat je
customer.
dat
It's really
hè,
important that
ons
it.
hele
It's
verhaal
really a
blijft
top of.
echt
And it
sorteren
assumes
en
that
bron
you,
is het
that we have
allerbeste wat
our.
je kunt doen om je CO2-impact te reduceren en je circulariteit te verhogen. Er zijn verschillende redenen
Our whole
waarom
story
je
really
op een
sorting
gegeven
at
moment
source is the
maximum
very
bereikt.
best thing you can
Denk
do
aan
to
het
reduce your
ventilatievark,
CO2
een heel
impact and
divers
increase your
inputprofiel.
circularity. There are various reasons
Het
why this reaches a
gebruiksgesprek.
maximum at some
Er
point.
zijn er
Think of a
verschillende redenen
recreation park
waardoor
with a
het
very
maximum
diverse
wordt
visitor
bereikt.
profile.
En dan is
Or maybe
Circular
it's a
Plus
lack of
een
space.
perfecte
For
aanvulling.
example, there are various reasons for
Dankjewel,
reaching the
Alice.
maximum. And then
Ik heb
Circular
een
Plus is a
volgende
perfect
vraag.
addition. Thank
Ik
you,
weet even niet
Alice.
zo goed voor wie dat die is hoor. Hij verspringt weer. Even
I
kijken.
have the following question
Hij
here
stond
and I'm
net
just
live.
not sure who it's
Reactie
for.
even
He
alsjeblieft.
jumps
De vraag
again.
die net op
Let's
live
have a
stond.
look. He
Die
was just on
terugzending, die
live.
heb ik nog niet gehad.
Can the editors
Maar
please
ik
put
doe
back that question that
wel
was
de
just
redactie
live?
die vraag
Because I haven't
invult
had
en
one
die
yet.
net
But
van het
then,
scherm geschoten is.
while the
De
editors put
volgende
back
vraag,
those
en
questions
René
that
die
were
is voor
just
jou,
shot
die
off the
ook
screen,
niet-Renewi-klanten
I have the
gebruik
following
maken van
question.
Circulair
And
Plus om
Renee,
daarmee hun
that's for you.
emissies te verlagen.
Can't the new
En,
customers
ja,
also make use
we
of
hebben het,
Circular Plus to
René
reduce their
natuurlijk net al
emissions?
verteld.
Yes.
Nee,
Actually,
dat
we have
kan
that you
niet.
just told you.
Dit is
No,
echt puur
that's
voor
not
onze
possible.
eigen
This is
klanten.
really
Als die
just for
toegevoegde
us,
waarde
our
willen
own
hebben
customers.
aan,
We
aan
really want to
Renewi
provide
klanten.
that added value.
En, maar
Yes.
dus dat
And to
antwoord
Renewi
is zo
customers.
nee.
Ja,
And so the
aanvullend
answer is
hè,
very
in het
clear no.
systeem dat
In
Circulair
addition,
heeft
maybe the
toegelicht,
whole
dat
system.
heeft ook een
That's where Belnet
grensstructuur en dat is
explained.
binnen onze
That has also
activiteiten
drawn a
die wij
line, and
doen
that is
voor
within our
onze klanten.
activities that we do for our customer base.
Want dat is
So
de
yes,
waardeketen. Wij
because
zeggen
that's the
de
value
waardeketen.
chain.
En natuurlijk
Together,
binnen die
we are the chain and
waardeketen
it is within
daar
that value
zit je
chain.
inzet
And that's that part of the
bij
setting that Charbel was actually talking
dankjewel.
about too. Thank you
En de
so
volgende
much.
vraag hebben
Another
we uit de
question.
redactie
And
inderdaad
now,
goed
the
beantwoord.
editors have
Dankjewel
indeed put me
daarvoor.
live
Hoe
well.
werkt dat
Thank
dan?
you so much for
Vertel,
that.
hoe maak
How
je
does that
nu
work at the back?
verifieerbaar dat een ton
How does a new
lager
verifiable prevent a
twee
ton
keer
to
wordt geclaimd?
recycling from being claimed
Maybe I
twice?
can,
Ja.
maybe indeed I can answer this one. Indeed, one of the principles is that the benefits are shared within the system that already exists, within Renewi ecosystem that already exists, which means that Renewi per year or per period collect a certain amount of waste. And from this amount of waste, a certain amount is recycled. These are defined numbers that are captured within Renewi system. Now, think of it like a bank account. If you put €1 on a bank account, you can withdraw €1. You cannot withdraw 2, otherwise you're in minus.
Ja.
Okay, now, who guarantees that you don't withdraw the €2 is the bank itself through the bank system. And this is exactly what we build within Renewi. This is why we call it monitoring, reporting, and verification. So Renewi monitors what they are doing. They report what they are doing. So if they have recycled 1 ton, there is 1 ton available. And then at the end of the period, a third-party verifier, independent of Renewi, independent of KPMG, will come and will check that the balance is 0 or positive. What I mean by positive, Renewi can recycle 2 ton, but only allocate 1 because there is no demand for more.
Yeah.
So as long as they have enough in their account, in their balance to allocate, they allocate.
Yeah.
They cannot allocate 2 because otherwise there is negative and the verifier will check.
And then I have another question. Who is checking this?
A third-party verifier that is specified in that. In the Renewi case, it's the NV. You have chosen the NV. But there are other companies out there, and this is why there are certificates also issued with a signature and the unique identifier. So each customer will receive their own certificate as a proof also. It's not only being checked somewhere in a dark room.
And therefore, alias Renewi, it is audit-proof and stands like a rock. This is the foundation of Circular Plus. True. This is a very important
Dit is een
foundation.
heel belangrijk
This is also
fundament,
why we worked with
waarom we hebben
KPMG.
samengewerkt met
And
KPMG
indeed,
en
the
inderdaad,
independent auditor
de
DNB.
onafhankelijke
In this
auditeur
case and
DNB
for
in
us,
dit
it's
geval.
incredibly
En voor ons
important.
ontzettend belangrijk. We hebben hier
We've been
jaren
working
naartoe
towards
gewerkt
this for a year
om
to
die
get the
hele
whole back end
achterkant,
right.
goed te krijgen. En dat is een behoorlijk project met finance, IT.
And that she's quite a
Om
project
die
with
achterkant
finance IT to get that
verifieerbaar
backside ready for
Ja,
verifiable.
dankjewel.
Yes, thank you. Yes, Renee, I choose this as a customer. But don't you just do this by default? Renee, yes. That's a really good question actually. Our bank account. It does not have enough volume for that. No, maybe it's silly for me to say that, but that's actually what it comes down to. Look, if you want to claim electric miles, we drive many, of course, many times more kilometers, still, even with trucks with Euro 6. So it's impossible to get all our customers to claim electric miles. However, it is increasing more and more. So our bank account is getting bigger there. So more and more customers can make use of this. But there is simply a limitation at the moment. And the same also applies to waste that goes to after sorting. The volume that we are currently bringing there is still insufficient for the total volume. There is also not much capacity in the Netherlands that we can transfer all the volume after divorce. So we can't do it. By default, tick the box and all customers won't. So I hope that's how we've answered the question. So to add to that, because that's what all customers thought of it. Because we are here with yes, sustainable-minded people. But there are also many customers who are ultimately purely price-driven and have no interest in this at all. So we also need this customer pool to scale this. And making the minority the majority or the norm. Yes, thank you. Let's take a look. We had already asked this question. Can you also purchase this while separating your waste at source? So that one can go? That is a question to the editors. Then I have the following question. It's for Alice or Renee. I think you can answer me best. What is the impact on my waste costs if I opt for circular transport? HVO 100 biofuel or electric? Does this also mean that the waste at my location is actually collected by a HAVO or electric vehicle? That's two. These are two questions. Yes. So, question 1, what does it cost? Yes. It's a very Dutch question. What does it cost? It is therefore a surcharge per kilometer that is based on the surprise. So the extra costs that we also incur to carry it out that way. So that's an extra charge per kilometer. So I don't know off the top of my head what that does to the total transport costs. But it's a second one. How does that work then? So do we know how many kilometers a customer drives or how? How does that work? Yes, exactly. So we can read exactly. For example, when we drive a route with a roll container with a roller trolley, how many stops that have been, how many kilometers we drove. So we can really measure exactly how many kilometers drive for a customer. So that's where it starts. Then we have a surcharge per kilometer. So that's the work slightly different from the normal transport costs. But it's good to understand for that second question that it can be good. Because we're talking about the mass balance principle that if you choose HVO collection, that you will still be collected for it with diesel. This has to do with the fact that we cannot manage to operate only your address with an HVO or electric car.
Dus het is heel belangrijk om te begrijpen dat massabalans betekent dat er een match wordt gemaakt. Dat wordt toegewezen.
So it's very important to understand that mass balance principle means that a match is made that is assigned and that we therefore do not physically visit an address with an electric or ABO. As we say so beautifully, the equivalent of your miles or tons to recycling. That's the same thing. It is not physical. Your residual waste bag that goes to the sorting plant. But we do guarantee that we will deliver exactly that volume to a sorting installation. Yes. Alicia, the next question, yes. Sorry, Renee, but it's also for everything. How does circular relate to a new is your own responsibility to become more sustainable? Because if you are also sustainable, it or sustainability within Renewi, you are making that commitment to roadmaps to reduce our CO2 footprint. How does this relate to each other? Yes. Well, our plans go ahead. So that stays standing like a house. Quite a few initiatives and cases have been identified that we would like to accelerate, but who are really far from counting around. So the Circular Plus revenues. They help a lot to
Circular
calculate those business cases.
helpen heel erg om die business cases rond te rekenen.
So when it comes to a new sorting line or certain types of electric trucks that aren't counting around yet,
Niet rondrekenen, dan zorgen de opbrengsten van Circulair Plus ervoor dat we die gaten kunnen dichten.
then the
en
proceeds from
sneller
Circular Plus
kunnen
ensure that
dan
we can
onze
close those
plannen
gaps and thus be able to do it
sowieso
faster than our plans anyway,
nu gaan.
which we are going to implement anyway. Now go yes and what? What are our goals when it comes to CO2 reduction? Scope 1 and 2 and Scope 3? Can you say something about that to the viewers? Yes. We are currently revalidating our targets at SBTi. So it's all subject to verification. But we're now on a minus 42% scope. 1 and 2 emissions reductions by fiscal year 31. So 2030. Yes. And net zero in 2050, net zero in 2050. And of course, Circular Plus helps when it comes to transport. To give it the conversion to HVO 100 biofuel, it was approximately an 86% reduction. Well, we want to go as much as possible towards zero emission by 2030. Because, of course, our emissions are a large part of all the diesel consumption of all those trucks. It is also partly included in certain waste treatment processes involving thermal cleaning. But that float is, yes, really, you can go a long way with electrification. So we hope to focus on electrification as much as possible. And HVO 100 biofuel is just a wonderful transition fuel. As long as it can't be completely electric yet. Yes, because René was just talking about our savings account for electric kilometers. Isn't it still that big? But will it grow enough in the coming years? Because there is a lot of interest. When I look at the questions for circular transport for the electric one, but go? How much are we going to invest in electric trucks is actually mine. Yes. We have now recently adopted an, in principle, EV by default procurement policy for the Netherlands. So that means where the business case is good enough or not dramatic and it's technically possible, we buy electrically. So that must be fast. Because a truck lasts an average of 10 years with us. So that means you'll be replacing it fairly quickly. So I don't have exact amounts for you. But I do expect us to go really fast now. Yes, thank you. Another question. Yes. That's over again. Given the significant impact of post-sorting, 26% recycling. To what extent has been considered to implement this as a standard solution with a but that is not possible. Because there is not enough capacity. René just said it, right. But what then? The interesting second part is with a collective cost distribution, instead of investing it with individual customers. I did find that an interesting way of thinking. The collective. Yes, the collective. That's a very nice idea if you can indeed fully do this for all your customers. Look what we have with Circular Plus now. What we now have in terms of available capacity. What we have in the different forms of Circular Plus. Yes. We would like to give that to those customers who really have an interest in it. Or at least they also have ambitions to radiate more circularity. So for those customers, it's just a really nice tool. But even for customers who just say I just can't do source separation anymore. If you are in the city center of Amsterdam, yes, then it is very difficult to want that. Yes, because you're running out of space. Whatever. But if you do want to be sustainable, yes, then, of course, we have a fantastic tool here to offer that. Yes, thank you. Another question, why do municipalities maintain waste separation requirements at the front of the workplace? While things are many times more effective after divorce at Renewi, well, whether divorce is more effective, the pre-divorce, we want to get away from that discussion for a while, from staying away. But do you understand the questions? No. Why not just default to post-sorting and, well, that's actually the same answer I just gave. However, you must have sufficient capacity to be able to make do with post-sorting. Yes, and that's right now, and after divorce, you can't use all the types of waste you have either. Certain requirements must also be met. Very wet waste, so to speak. Yes. That is very difficult to separate because, again, it does not come out enough that you are left with a lot of residues or residues. Yes, and therefore you only have a very small yield. And it's also adding costs. So let's put that first. So, I think that's where your disability actually lies. Yes, Charbel, come to you for a little while.
Eventjes naar jou toe. You've written a very interesting white paper on this case. Can you summarize in 30 seconds what the white paper is all about and where you can download it? Because if you want to know more about the MRV system, it's a must read, isn't it?
That's correct. A lot of clients today, a lot of our the organization that we work with, they come to us with a very simple but complex question. They say, we have an SPTI, we have a target. We are doing everything we can, but we have hit a wall, which means that either technically we cannot do more, or anything addition now it's becoming super expensive. What can we do?
Yeah.
And this is where something like Circular Plus help them, because again, you capture the low-hanging fruit within your organization, but if it becomes too expensive, there are alternatives within the value chain in order to lower your impact. So the idea is, and this white paper explain how you can leverage a service like Circular Plus. We explain a bit more how the MRV works in order to be transparent, credible, and auditable, right? And then we also explain the principle, because as Alice and René, you mentioned, these are within the principle of current commercial agreement you have with your client. So we explain that in the white paper.
Okay.
Now, where you can download it? You can download it on KPMG website, but we also know that today you have launched a special web page for Circular Plus as Renewi, and you have kindly linked also to this white paper. So it can be found there also.
Okay.
So go to the Circular Plus landing page and you can also download the white paper there. One last question. Everything. And then, in the meantime, I ask the gentleman to stand up, because we'll end with you. So what is René Charbel? You can get up and then anything goes. In the meantime, answer the last question. Yes, feel free to get up. That doesn't matter. How is the distribution between diesel and HVO transport at Renewi, currently? And how do you guarantee the equivalent if one is more diesel? How? Okay. There is more anyway. We use more diesel than HVO. Let me say that first and foremost that 90, 10, 80, 20, or is that I would say we might. No, yes, sorry. They're asking a really good question. Just say 90, 10. Will we get there a little bit earlier? 9,010, yes, so 9,110. But how do you guarantee that that equivalent will also be driven with HVO 100 biofuel? Well, that's we have there. I'm quite happy with the question, because so much work has gone into getting the entire accounting system right at the back. Because so you have to, yes, actually tracking how much HVO is being refueled every day, how many kilometers are driven with it, and that's actually you, well, and your battery if they can be claimed from your bank account. Yes, that's your bank account, your bank account. And then, on the other hand, there is a customer who says I think driving on HVO is very important. So I choose that too. On that side, we need to start monitoring. How many kilometers do we really drive for this customer? Well, Batchet is created in the bank account document, which is therefore linked daily to the activities for the Circular Plus customers. So that system. And the moment a certificate is issued after 12 months, there are also all the Batchets on the list. And that's what makes it verifiable for the advisor. To be able to deduce exactly that this is not promised twice. Very clear, very clear. And so it also means that if it's 9,010 now, let's just say 10% is when that demand starts to increase. So we need to get to work on thinking more HVO. And that is exactly the intention as far as I am concerned. Yes, for Circular Plus, yes, that is indeed. In doing so, we accelerate our sustainability. Also the sustainability of customers. Exactly. Then we will go to the closure. Everything. We spent 1.5 hours talking about Circular Plus. I think it has become very clear that it is audit-proof. And with Charbel and his contribution. But I have here. And I think it's good to show it as the last slide for a while. I hope that the studio will also want to put it on the screen now, Alex, because this is actually the summary in one slide. And can you just briefly pitch to the viewers what Circular Plus is and what solutions are and what impact it has? So yes, with Circular Plus, you can choose on top or the sustainable version. Different from business as usual. You can see the basics here. Well arranged. That happens. Collection with Euro 6 trucks. Super efficient. Wood and residual waste go to biomass or waste. Circular Plus power plants for energy generation can therefore be chosen for an option that suits your goals. Whether that's at Circularity or CO2, you can opt for a more sustainable alternative. So collection with HVO 100 biofuel, that already involves a CO2 reduction, or even more sustainable. Electric trucks that also run on green energy with almost no emissions at all. Huge reduction. So with wood, you can choose to have the equivalent of your wood volume go to recycling, with a super high recycling rate of 90%. And finally, residual waste. There we now have the taste of the NAS sorted. So that more materials can be preserved and CO2 is reduced. You also see two things still in development here. So that's already a small nod to what we expect to launch later this year, and other products in addition. But for now, this is the starting point and not the first choices that exist. Thank you, Alice, for this latest scolding. Very good argument about what exactly Circular Plus is. I want the viewers. Thank our customers back home so much. I already heard at the beginning of the broadcast that there were already over 200 people in the webinar. We are very happy about that. Very thankful for that. Thanks for watching, and next week we'll send an email with the link to watch it again. And we're still going to try to send the presentation in PDF. Did we just decide? But I'll have to see how that system works technically. And then I want to close the webinar for now. And then thanks for watching and see you next time.